This will be a two-part lesson series on causation and experimental design. First, we'll tackle what do we mean when we say A causes B. And then we'll see that definition of A causes B will help us understand how we should design experiments. So we're discussing here then the method of science. In a couple of terms at the outset, a hypothesis is an early attempt at explaining something. And since a hypothesis is an explanation, then a hypothesis is giving the cause of some event. So to explain something is to give the cause of that event. Experiments are procedures to test the truthfulness of hypotheses. And in order to design good experiments, it is helpful to understand what we mean by one thing causing another. So here then we're going to investigate what it means to say A causes B. Well, there are going to be three parts to our definition, and here they are. The first part is that A must come before B, and again, A and B here can stand for any kind of thing in nature, where one thing is causing another. A is the thing that's causing B. A must come before B is our first point. Second point, if A and B are not happening, then supplying A should lead to B, all other things being the same. So if A and B are not happening, then the presence of A is going to lead to the presence of B if A really does cause B. Third point, if A did not happen, B would not have happened. Again, all other things being the same. Now we're going to investigate this definition of causation using our nemesis here, the coronavirus. First, a quick background on viruses. Viruses are very, very tiny structures. If we take a look at this scale in nature here, the tens here represent units of meters. So right here, 10 to the 0 power is 1. So this would be objects that are about 1 meter in size. 10 to the second power is 100, 10 to the fourth, 10,000, 10 to the sixth, a million. So each increment here, we're multiplying by 100. So you can see the human creature here, the human form, is located right here. Our bodies may be between 1 meter, 2 meters in size. Earth, Sun, galaxies, obviously much larger structures in our universe. And then going smaller from humans, we have cells. We'll discover that animals and plants are made of cells, and cells are composed of molecules, and molecules are composed of atoms, and atoms are composed of subatomic particles like electrons and protons and neutrons, etc. So there is a large scale. There's a great size difference in objects in our universe. Well, let's focus on this area here, highlighted in the red dashed lines here. They've magnified it down here. And here we see then some familiar creatures, whales and mice, fruit fly, a hare. And now we're getting down to some stuff that you need a microscope to see, like cells. This would be a human cell. There are small cells like bacteria. You can see them with a light microscope, but when you get smaller than bacteria, you're going to start to need to use different technologies, like an electron microscope. So an electron microscope will enable us to see, to visualize these structures called viruses. In fact, here's an electron microscope picture of the coronavirus. These little units is one viral particle, and we'll learn about how these viruses do their damage in a moment. Now, in the current pandemic then, this is the culprit. This virus is causing a disease that we call COVID-19. It's a respiratory disease, and the name of the virus that causes the disease is the SARS-CoV-2. So this stands for the SARS coronavirus 2. SARS stands for severe acute respiratory syndrome. And then coronavirus 2, well, there were other coronaviruses previously known, so they labeled this one coronavirus 2. It's no joke. In just 5 months, from February to May, it is the third leading killer in the U.S. Heart disease, cancer, then COVID-19. The virus itself can be shown here in a picture like this. It's got this membrane, so this is the boundary of the virus. Stuck in the membrane are these proteins, like these spike proteins, and other proteins are inserted into the membrane. And inside the virus is the genetic material for the virus. In this case, it's an RNA virus. Some viruses have DNA. This one has RNA. And later in the course, we'll learn about how DNA or RNA operate and why they're such important molecules. But these spikes on the surface of the virus are really important because these proteins can lock onto proteins on our human cells, and that's what allows the virus to gain entry into our cells. Now, in this complicated diagram, we'll just briefly go through what happens when we're infected with the virus. So over on the left here, we see the human lungs. And here we have the airway, the trachea here. It's going to branch into two major branches, and then it keeps on branching. And here we can see some of the what happens at the ends of these branches. There are these clusters of these rounded structures called alveoli. We'll just call them air sacs. So these are dead-end structures. So the air is going to go into these air sacs, and then it will have to be expelled when we exhale. Now, if we cut open one of these air sacs, so we do a thin slice through it and magnify it, this is what we see over here. The pink area, this would be the air sac. So when we inhale, air is going to come into this region right here, this space here. But surrounding each air sac are blood vessels. Blood vessels carry red blood cells, and red blood cells, their job is to transport oxygen to our body cells. Well, where are the red blood cells going to get oxygen? From the inhaled air. So the air that we inhale has a higher concentration of oxygen than the blood here. So oxygen will move from the air in the space through the wall of the lung, of the air sac, through the wall of the blood vessel and into red blood cells. And then the red blood cells will carry the oxygen back to the heart, and the heart will pump the blood around to the body, and the red blood cells will give up their oxygen cargo to the body cells. At the same time, the blood has been carrying waste materials like carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is a gas that moves into this space here, and that's what we exhale. So what the lungs are doing, an important function, we'll study this later in the course, they're doing gas exchange. So this would be a healthy person. Along comes the virus. So if we're exposed to the virus, those spike proteins on the surface of the virus have just such a shape that it's like a key entering a lock. When the virus binds to the cells in the lung, the virus can gain entry into those lung cells. And once the virus is in there, it will reproduce, and then it damages the lung cells. It can destroy the lung cells. And we are now infected with this virus. Now, one of the consequences of a viral infection is that the immune system responds. And one of the things the immune system does, the immune cells that make up our immune system, they release certain chemicals that make the blood vessels get larger. They dilate the blood vessels so that more immune cells can come to the site of infection, but that also makes them leaky. And so some of the fluid in the blood starts to leak out into the air sacs. Well, this is not a good situation because in order for effective gas exchange, there can't be a buildup of fluid in these air sacs. And so when the fluid builds up, now the gas exchange is impaired. So it's harder to exchange those important gases. So the lungs start to function less well. And in severe cases, then, these air sacs just fill up with fluid, and now the person really has difficulty breathing. Now, there's a lot more to say about infection with this virus, but we're simply using this as an example to understand what we mean when we say A causes B. So back to this definition of A causes B. So again, A must come before B, and in this case we're saying the virus is causing the COVID-19 symptoms. So A must come before B. People get the virus before developing the symptoms of COVID-19. So point number one is satisfied in our case. If A and B are not happening, supplying A should lead to B. Well, those exposed to the virus are at elevated risk for developing COVID-19. So again, if you're a healthy person, but now you're exposed to this virus, that leads to an elevated risk of developing COVID-19 symptoms. And finally, if A did not happen, B would not have happened. So preventing exposure to the virus will prevent COVID-19. So back to this slide here, when the text here says coronavirus disease is respiratory disease caused by the novel virus. Notice then this concept that one thing is causing another. This is what we've just investigated. When we say that the virus is causing the COVID-19, what we mean is that all three of these points have been satisfied. And so we can be confident that the virus really is causing this disease that we call COVID-19.